All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. Looks like we have a few people on the line at this point, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Uh, Thanks again for everyone's attendance. This is our latest in our OIE Meetup series. Today, we're going to be focused on securing AI agents with cross-app access, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about exactly what cross-app access is as we go through this, as you might imagine. Um, as always, my name is Brent Arrington. I'm joined by and supported by a host of my uh, colleagues who are the true brains of the operation. They will be helping me with the Q&A during this session. So as we go through the content today, please take advantage of the Q&A in the Zoom to post any of your questions there as we're going through the content. We will address those through the Q&A. If we have time at the end of the session today, we will potentially address some of those live. But please use the Q&A. That way we have a record. And if there are any questions that we don't have time to get to, we have a record of those and can follow up on those after the session. As always, I'll throw up our safe harbor slide. In particular, today, we're definitely going to be talking about some forward-looking concepts. So I'll throw out the safe harbor qualifier here. And quickly, our agenda for today. So as I mentioned, we're going to be focused today on cross-app access and how that fits into the use cases of securing agentic AI access across your applications. So we'll start with just an overview of cross-app access, what it is, why you should use it, why you should care. And then we'll go into some demos. We'll take a look at how you can configure cross-app access today in early access if you want to test this out and play around with it. We'll also see a demonstration of cross-app access in action. I'll share some resources for cross-app access. We'll, as I said, if we have time, we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. And finally, if we have time at the end, we'll go through a quick recap of how to upgrade to OIE and some resources around that, as everything that I'm going to be talking about today is available only in OIE. So let's start with an overview of cross-app access. So what exactly is this thing? Well, first off, it is a new type of token exchange. So for those who are developers or developer adjacent in the audience, if you're familiar with OIDC token exchange flows, this is similar to that. It's a new type of token exchange. Specifically, there's a new grant type called Identity Assertion Authorization Grant. The QR code there on this slide will take you to the specification docs around this. This is a proposed extension of the OIDC spec that we, along with some others in the industry, are working on to get published as an official extension of the OIDC spec. Now, what does all that mean exactly? So I'm about to grossly oversimplify this, but you can kind of think about this in an analogy of sorts. So cross-app access is to AI agents as SAML or OIDC is to humans, in the sense that this is a standard protocol for authorizing access for these AI agents across applications and even across security domains, right? So it's basically a standard mechanism for having identity admins be able to grant or block access to agents across the various applications and resources that are under their purview. Another way to think about this is sort of user consent for enterprise apps, right? So if you think about typical flows that probably most of us have experienced today. So let's say I'm in an application like let's say I'm in Slack and I want to connect Slack to Zoom, for example, so that I can immediately launch a Zoom meeting directly from Slack, right? When I make that initial connection, what happens? Slack is reaching out to Zoom to request access to my account in Zoom so that it can then have the access that it needs to start up a meeting, et cetera. But from the end user's perspective, what happens is there's a pop-up asking for consent. So you get, you know, Zoom is asking for permission to access this, and this from, or excuse me, other way around. Slack is asking for permission for this, and this to access your Zoom account. Do you want to allow this or whatever? And of course, everybody just, completely ignores that and says yes and moves on. So in reality, for enterprise applications, it's not the end user that owns that data, right? It's the enterprise, it's the business, and so it really should be the enterprise, the identity admin who is controlling and making that decision on which applications you're comfortable accessing data from which other applications, right? So this is a way to allow for your IDM admins to configure that type of access themselves so they have control of it, and it makes a more frictionless experience for the end users on top of that because they're not constantly getting prompted with user consent pop-ups that they're just going to ignore and say yes to anyway. So if you were at Octane or if you saw any of the presentations at Octane, you've probably seen this slide. But the idea of cross-app access is that this by adopting this protocol, it will make agents fabric ready from the get-go. So in other words, any capability in Okta that exists today in the Okta Identity Fabric, adopting cross-app access for your agents basically brings those agents into full first-class identity status and makes them fabric ready from the get-go. So you can have agents who are requesting access from one app to the other. All of that can be governed by Okta and managed through Okta. It shifts the control of access to the identity layer instead of individual apps and individual end users. And it standardizes how all of that data is accessed across systems. Why should you want to implement this? Well, if you are a builder of B2B applications, so commercial B2B apps or agents, this will allow you to provide your customer admins with a way to control access for their agents across different applications and accessing different enterprise data within their ecosystems. You can, going back to my earlier grossly oversimplified analogy, this is sort of the equivalent of supporting SAML or OIDC for human identities. This is giving a standardized way for admins to control which agents can access which other resources that are controlled by your application. And because this is based on a standard, an open standard, you're giving this deeply integrated authorization capability but you're not tying it to any specific identity provider. It's a standardized approach to how data is accessed and granted across different IDPs. Now, if you're building internal applications, so you're building your own internal applications with agents that are accessing content across or data across different applications, and you control all of that, technically you don't really need cross-app access. You can implement those things with standard OIDC token exchange flows today and make it work because you control every piece of it. But by doing this with cross-app access, you are enabling an easier configuration and control of that access to a non-developer persona. So whereas you can accomplish all of this with token exchange flows, all of that configuration would be handled entirely at the OIDC level. So you're configuring your authorization servers and your scopes and your access policies at the auth server level and all of that. It's a very kind of developer-centric way of managing those things. And in some cases, that may not be kind of within the sweet spot of your IT admin's skill set. But by doing this with cross-app access in Okta, you're giving a very accessible control panel for your IT admins to manage which applications and which agentic applications should have access to which other applications data and so forth. In addition to that, you're providing clear visibility of all of the steps in this flow in the Okta system log. So not only like which apps users are accessing, but which agents within which apps are accessing which data from which other agents and which users they're acting on behalf of. All of that good stuff is all now visible in the Okta system log. Um, and by doing this, it also helps to provide leverage on commercial ISVs to adopt cross-app access as a standard protocol, which really kind of ties into sort of the North Star of what we're trying to accomplish here. And we want to see a world where there is a standard for securing agentic access across applications, much like we have for human identities today with SAML or OIDC. Now, let's take a quick look at uh, how to set this up, first of all, in your Okta tenant, and then we'll take a quick look at this in action as well. So first thing I'm going to do is move into my admin console. Let me get signed in here. Now, this is something that is available today as a self-service early access feature in your Okta preview environment. So if you go to your Okta preview environment, if you go to settings and features, under the self-service early access flag, if you look for cross-app access, you should see this feature flag. So if you have not already, you can turn this on. And what this does is it basically gives you access to some sample applications that support this flow so that you can kind of begin to test this out, build this into your own applications and see how this works. So once you've enabled cross-app access, the feature flag, if you go to applications and you browse the app catalog, you're going to see a couple of new applications. Well, you have to kind of search for them, but they're there. So the first thing is there is an app that models the requesting app or the app that would be hosting the agent that is making the request to some other resource. So if you search for Agent Zero, you'll see there's this new app here, Agent Zero Cross App Access. This is modeling a requesting app. So this would be an app that a user is logging into that has some sort of AI agent running within it that is going to be making requests for some resource in a second different application, right? So going back to my earlier example, if I'm in Slack and I want to be able to launch a Zoom directly from my Slack in that example would be the requesting app, or excuse me, Slack in that example would be the requesting app, the Agent Zero app, and the resource app would be Zoom, which would be the app that it's requesting access to do it's some data or perform some action on, right? So the Agent Zero is your requesting app. And then if we go back to applications, the second app that is relevant to this flow is going to be called To Do Zero. So if you search for To Do Zero, you'll see this app here. This is an example of the resource app. So this is the app in that flow that my agent is going to be requesting access to. So, and going back to my example, this would be Zoom because Slack is requesting access to launch a Zoom meeting directly from the Slack interface, right? So I actually have some examples already set up here. So I'll just kind of walk through some of these. So I'm going to look at actually, let's do this one. All right. So I've set up a requesting app, so an Agent Zero app, and this is going to be called an XAA AI chatbot app. So this app represents a chatbot interface that you can use to ask all sorts of questions around college football. This is basically an OIDC app with some additional components, like the cross-app access components baked into it. Specifically, it's going to be this Manage Connections tab. So once you have your ODC configurations in place, the different piece here is this Manage Connections piece. So this is where I can look for other cross-app access supporting applications and either specify those apps as apps that I am going to grant consent to, or I'm going to add these as apps that are providing consent to this app. But either way, this would need to be another application that is supporting cross-app access. But I can add these connections. I can disable these connections. Actually, if I just completely remove this connection and I'll add it back, you can see what that looks like. So here we go. This list will pull any other existing applications that are supporting cross-app access. So if I kind of go back here, let me get rid of that. Let's go back here. Add this again. There we go. So any app that is supporting cross-app access would be available to select from this list, and we can add this and save it. Same thing applies on the other side. So if I go back to my apps and I look at my resource app, it's a similar idea. It's an OIDC application. It's going to provide you with a client ID, client secret, but it also has this managed connections piece. And again, this is where you can set up the cross-app access connection across the two different applications. Now, again, setting up this managed connection, again, going back to the super oversimplified analogy, this is sort of the administrative equivalent of granting user consent across these applications. So this is like my IT admin saying, yes, this NCAA server stats app is granting access to its data or APIs or whatever the case may be to this requesting app, which is my chatbot app, right? Okay. Now, once this is in place, the apps that are configured for cross-app access it'll enable those apps to facilitate those agentic requests between those two apps without having to prompt the user for any additional user consent. And it also will allow the admin to stop that access if necessary. So if the admin decides, you know what, I don't feel comfortable sharing data from this app to this other app, you can disable those connections and it would stop that. So let's take a quick look at what that flow would look like in action. So I'm going to move over to the next demo here. Now let's take a look at cross-app access flows in action. So for this demonstration, we are going to have, or we already have, two OIDC apps that we've created that both support cross-app access. We have an AI chat interface app that is going to be our requesting app that has an AI agent associated with it. We have our NCAA football stats app, which is our resource app. Both are OIDC apps protected by Okta. And we have a managed connection for cross-app access between the two apps. And we're going to start by signing into our AI chat interface with Okta as an end user. And once we're in, we're going to use the AI interface to ask the AI interface a question about college football. And once we ask this question, that's going to trigger our agent to make a request to our college football stats application, our resource application, for the data that it needs to answer our question. And on the left-hand side, you'll notice there are a number of things happening under the hood here. We have token exchange flow, where we're getting our ID token from Okta, from the authentication of the end user. We're doing a token exchange to get what's called an ID JAG token, which we then send to our resource application, which validates that ID JAG token, issues an access token, which the agent can then use to make the necessary API calls to access the data that it needs to answer our question. And once our AI agent gets a little clarifying information about specifically what team I'm asking about, it can answer our question. And here we see that we now have our answer from our AI chatbot. Now, just to reiterate the architecture involved here, again, we have our two OIDC apps, both protected by Okta, our requesting app, which is this AI chat interface, and our resource app, which is the stats server that the AI agent is accessing to get the data it needs. We also have a managed connection between those two that allows the cross-app access request by the agent operating from the chat interface into the resource app without having to prompt the end user for any additional consent. Now, to reiterate the flow, the first step in this process was our end user authentication. So we authenticated into our chat interface through a standard OIDC flow with Okta. We did a token exchange at that point, or once we asked the question rather, and the agent needed data from the resource app, a token exchange was initiated at Okta where we received our ID token from Okta and exchanged that for an ID JAG token, which is the new cross-app access token type. This ID JAG was then presented to the authorization server for our resource application, and it was used to exchange for an access token to that resource application, which our agent was then able to use to query the resource app through API calls to get the data that it needed to answer our question. So some key takeaways here. There's no user consent required because that's managed by the admin through their cross-app access, the managed connections. It's a secure token exchange, and it's a seamless user experience. Now we can verify this flow also in our Okta system log. So if we go to the system log, we can see the identity assertion authorization grant event. This is the cross-app access grant from our agent to the resource server acting on behalf of our authenticated user. Now, we've seen the happy path. Let's now take a look at what happens if we remove some critical pieces of this configuration. So we're going to start by unassigning our end user from the resource application. So if we're going to remove our end user assignment to the stats server, we're going to leave the assignment to our chat interface intact, however. So now our end user has access to the chat interface, but no longer has access to the underlying resource application that the AI chatbot needs to use. So now if we go back to our chat interface and attempt to ask a question, we can see our agent has encountered an error. And if we go back to our system logs, we can again confirm what has happened under the hood here. And specifically, we can see that our cross-app access request was denied. There was a failure. So our token request was denied because we no longer have access, or our end user, our authenticated end user, no longer has access to the resource application. It has access to the chat that it was directly logged into, but not to the resource app that its agent acting on its behalf was attempting to access. And therefore we get a failure. Now, if we restore that access to the end user, so we'll assign this back to our end user. And if we go back now to our chat interface and attempt to ask a question again, now that we've restored access to the request or the resource application to our end user, now the agent acting on its behalf will be granted access to that data, and it will be able to answer our question. And we can confirm this once again in our system log. So now if we go back and we look for our cross-app access token exchange event, we can see that this was now successful. Now, in addition to the end user needing access to both our requesting application and our resource application, the other piece that's needed for this connectivity to all work is the managed connection between the two apps themselves. So this is what allows a request coming from an authenticated user in my requesting application to be honored by our resource application. So let's see what happens if we remove that managed connection and try this flow once again. So I'm going to remove my managed application or my managed connection. I'm going to sign back into my requesting app, my AI chat interface. I'm going to attempt to ask a question, and we can see that our agent has encountered a problem. And like before, we can go to our system log and verify exactly what happened. And we can see here that because we've removed the managed connection between the two apps, even though my user has access to both applications, the agent is not allowed to make the cross-app request from one app to the other. All right. So that was a quick look at cross-app access in action. Some resources that can help you if you are interested in testing this out yourself. First off, we have just kind of a general blog about cross-app access. So this is a little more kind of introductory overview on a blog on the Okta site. The QR code there will take you to that. There are also some links from this blog to some additional resources. For example, our developer blog, which actually walks you through in more detail an actual sample integration of cross-app access with your app. So this will actually kind of walk you through how to set this up, how to configure your apps, how to configure the Okta side, all of that. So you can use that QR code to get to our developer blog if you're interested in testing this out yourself. There's also on our GitHub repository, there is an example app, a cross-app access example app that gives you kind of a reference architecture for how to implement this in your own apps if you're building your own first-party apps. And again, that QR code can take you there. Um, with that, I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions. And let me check first off the Q&A.
Yeah, there's one inside the Q&A that I want you to bring up.
Yeah. Is
It's
that the one?
yeah. Do you need to maintain four applications, two for general access, and then two to enable the cross application flow?
No. No, you don't. So so what I'm demonstrating today um, is what's available now in early access. There are additional capabilities that are coming out early in the first part of next year and the February timeframe that will uh, kind of extrapolate some of that functionality into a new uh, object type called an agent. So you'll instead of having those sort of prepackaged test apps like I saw there, you'll actually be able to configure some of this with an agent. You'll be able to connect uh, an OIDC app to that agent to make that sort of binding there. So you would have an agent, you would connect the app to that, so you wouldn't have to sort of have a duplication of applications. You would have your OIDC app, and then you would have an agent, and you would just sort of connect those two data structures.
One additional piece to that is, do the authorizations need to be managed separately between those two?
When you meaning what different separate authorization servers? What do you mean?
I think it's the users. Oh, I'm assuming this is from Mark. I'm assuming it's maintaining the user's permission and the agent's permission separately.
Yeah, so there are a couple different things there. So for an on behalf of scenario where the agent is acting on behalf of user, then the user would have to have access to both applications, both the requesting app and the resource app, and whatever access that user is granted through the directly to that user through those integrations, that would be one limiting factor of what the agent potentially could do. Separate from that, you would be able to configure through particular scopes what the agent has access to as well, right? So if the agent is making API calls, for example, to the resource application, you would be able to limit what specific scopes that agent could or could not access through the API calls. And on top of that, it would also be limited by the access of the end user that that agent is acting on behalf of. So it's sort of a least privileged scenario where it's the combination of what the end user can do and what the agent is allowed to do, and it's sort of a filter where you would get the most restrictive outcome of those two. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Looks like Mark had another part to that. He's worried about having to authorize a user for both Zoom sign in and Zoom agent. But it sounds like you manage the user's access to Zoom and then manage the agent's access separately.
that is correct. That is correct. And one thing I want to point out, so the components that are going to be available early next year are really going to be um, they're going to enable you to build your own first party agents and apps. Support for cross app access, uh, like broader support with commercial ISVs, is something that we're working on, and it's also something that we're evangelizing so that our customers can promote this with their other uh, ISVs to support this. And the idea would be much like today, you have apps like Zoom that support SAML or whatever. They would also support cross-app access, and that would be baked into the OIN integration for that. So you wouldn't have to configure this yourself. It would kind of be baked into that app, and it would just be, you would have the manage connections tab pop up, and you would be good to go. So it all kind of be in one place. That is sort of the North Star of where we want to get. In the meantime, from a cross-app access perspective, it's available now for you to build your own with, and so that you can see how this works, see the advantages of it within your own environment, and use that as sort of leverage to say, hey, uh, Mr. ISV, I can build this for my own apps. You should support this as well, because this is sort of the standard that should be adopted broadly by the industry.
And, and there's also the question about the agent object will be in Universal Directory.
Yes. Yeah.
It, yeah, it's going to become a first class object.
Correct, correct. I'm not sure. So that is part of the functionality that's coming early next year. There's actually a closed beta of that functionality now. I'm not showing that now because again, it's not something that's broadly available in early access yet, but it will be early next year. So we'll have some follow-up sessions that kind of go into that piece of the functionality as well. But all of that stuff is going to be there, and it will be available independent of cross-app access. So there are a lot of things that you can do and need to do with agents that are independent of the cross-app access managed connections piece. So that registration and UD, being able to detect agents, being able to manage access to things like secure secrets and things like that. All of that is independent of cross-app access, and those capabilities are coming early next year, and we'll have some follow-up sessions on those once that's available. But um, yeah,
Yeah. And just to reiterate, you can see the proposed user interface from the Octane keynote.
yeah,
There's a recording of it, so you just have a feel for what the concept is.
yeah,
It seems pretty quiet otherwise.
yeah. Do we have any other questions from the audience? You can either add those to the Q&A, or if you like, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and let you ask your question live if you like.
Uh, Looks pretty quiet.
All right. Well, while you're thinking, let me kind of quickly go through a reminder of how to get to OIE. Again, everything that I've shown today is dependent on being on OIE. to have access to this. So if you're not yet on OIE, here's how you get there. So you should by now everyone should have seen if you log into your tenant as a super admin, you should see this big banner at the top of your dashboard with a big scary schedule upgrade button. Don't worry, you can click that button and it doesn't lock you into anything. The first step in that process is it's going to run an eligibility check against your tenant. It'll report back with any items that either need to be called to your attention and you just acknowledge, or in some cases, there may be some configuration items that need to be taken care of before it will let you move forward with actually scheduling the upgrade. Once you've addressed all of that, you can then pick a date and time for your upgrade, and then it just happens automatically and should be a fairly seamless process. So there's no downtime. If end users have set active sessions pre-upgrade, those sessions persist through the upgrade, etc. In terms of upgrade resources, we have our OIE KB hub. So this has links to knowledge base articles, links to our community site that's run by our product acceleration team. That's this team that runs these webinars. Our community site also has links to sign up for one-on-one office hours sessions with myself or other members of this team. And we also have links to our YouTube playlist, which contains recordings of all of these webinars, which I see a question just came through on how we can access this. Go to that community site, go to the link to our community, or go to the link to our YouTube playlist, and you'll find this there. Usually takes about a week or so to get these uploaded to our YouTube channel. We also have our upgrade knowledge base hub with more detailed information on eligibility items. So this would be like if you do have any eligibility items called out in your eligibility report, each one of those would have a link to a specific KB article about that item. That's where this, I guess those are all housed here in this hub. This also has articles talking about feature changes and things like sample test plans that can give you an idea of sort of the things you need to consider when you're designing a test plan for your upgrade. We have a developer hub, OIE Upgrade Developer Hub, that talks in more detail around more developer-centric changes, API changes, new OIE SDKs, sign-in widget information, other developer resources, and developer-specific test strategies. We also have, as I kind of teased earlier, we have our community sites, which is run by this team. You can go here to sign up for one-on-one office hours with a member of this team. So you can bring your specific questions, whether that's about eligibility items or new features, et cetera. Any OIE related question, you can bring to those office hours. You can post or respond to questions directly there in that forum. And you can get updates on upcoming events like these webinars and recordings to the previous webinars and so forth. And speaking of those recordings, we have our OIE playlist on Okta's YouTube channel. Again, all of the recordings of this series that's been going on for a couple of years now can be found there. And finally, just a quick plug. This is a monthly series, so we will have another session coming up in December. The exact date and topic has yet to be determined, but that will be announced shortly on our community site. So if you haven't already, feel free to bookmark that community site and keep an eye out there for the next session coming up in December. All right. So I'm going to pause here again quickly. Did we have any other questions or comments from anyone?
Seems pretty quiet still.
All right.
You,
I
you
will.
answered all the questions.
I know. It was that clear and concise.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, I will take that as a no. So, everyone, thank you again for your attendance. Dan, thanks as always for hopping on and helping out with questions. Again, keep an eye out for the next information on the next session, which will be coming up in December. That should get posted to the community site within like the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, thanks again for joining. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys.